The crystal chandeliers scattered soft gold across the dining room, reflecting off polished silverware and glinting wine glasses. Everything looked flawless, the table impeccably set, the linens crisp, the ambient chatter of guests low but lively. From the outside, I imagine anyone peeking through the tall windows would think my life was perfect, that my marriage was a model of luxury and happiness, the kind of life most people only saw in magazines. I smiled politely at the waiter as he poured the wine, careful not to spill a drop, and caught my reflection in the ornate mirror behind the host's chair. My smile felt practiced, almost like armor. For years, I'd perfected the art of appearing content, while swallowing the constant stream of subtle jabs, dismissive remarks, and underhanded criticisms my husband threw my way. Tonight, though, the carefully maintained illusion was about to fracture. He leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, and laughed, just loud enough for half the table to hear. "Of course, darling," he said, voice dripping amusement. "We can all just pretend your little projects ever really mattered." The words sliced through the warmth of the evening, and my stomach dropped. Conversation stuttered, forks paused mid-air, and eyes darted between us. The laughter that had once been shared between us now felt like a weapon pointed straight at me. My cheeks burned, hot with embarrassment, but I forced a tight smile, nodding as if the comment were a joke rather than the subtle dismissal it was. I'd spent years being told my ambitions were inconsequential, my voice barely worth acknowledgement. As I sipped my wine, tasting only the bitterness of humiliation, a thought hit me sharply. They didn't know who they were messing with. Not just tonight, not just in front of these people, but ever. For the first time in a long time, a quiet, furious determination began to rise inside me, almost imperceptible under the layers of protocol and expectation. The world might see a perfect dinner, a flawless marriage, a happy, wealthy couple. But inside, I was already imagining a life where I reclaimed every ounce of respect I had been denied. The laughter around me faded into a distant echo as I stared at him, realizing that this night would mark the first step of a transformation he would never see coming. I remember the early days of our marriage like a faded photograph, one that looked perfect to everyone else but held shadows only I could see. I had poured myself into the relationship. Long hours supporting his career, organizing social events, managing finances, even sacrificing my own professional growth to smooth over his ambitions. I believed that love meant giving everything, but over time, those sacrifices became invisible. Birthdays I spent alone while he attended networking events. Anniversaries celebrated quietly while he flaunted his successes. The subtle favoritism was constant. Praise for him, polite acknowledgement for me, laughter at his jokes, polite nods at mine. At the time, I rationalized it, told myself it was normal, but deep down, I began to feel like a ghost in my own life. I recall the first hints of true humiliation. A dinner with friends where he loudly complimented my sister's achievements while dismissing mine. A casual remark about how, "I guess she's lucky she married someone ambitious," that cut deeper than any insult could. At the time, I laughed along, swallowed my embarrassment, and forced a smile. But each instant stacked upon the last, eroding my sense of worth. I had become adept at hiding my anger, masking my hurt and pretending the constant undermining didn't matter. Yet every comment, every subtle jab lingered, forming a quiet storm inside me that I could no longer ignore. That dinner, the one with the crystal chandeliers and the gleaming silverware, was the final straw. As he leaned back, glass in hand, and mocked my latest project, the full weight of years of dismissal, condescension, and favoritism crashed over me. I felt every insult I had endured replay in that single moment, magnified 100-fold by the public setting and the eyes of those around us. My heart pounded with anger, my chest tightened with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. I realized how often I had minimized myself, how I had allowed someone else's ego to define my value. I clenched my fingers around my napkin, trying to steady myself, but my mind raced with clarity. Every compromise I had made, every dream I had shelved, every silent tear shed in private, all of it demanded recognition now. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't laugh off his insults, shrink into my seat, or ignore the humiliation. Something inside me shifted, a hard edge of resolve forming amidst the hurt. I rose slightly in my chair, feeling the weight of every gaze, the silence thick with anticipation, and I knew, with a certainty that stunned even me, that I couldn't stay another second. I pushed back my chair with deliberate force, the scrape echoing unnervingly across the polished floor. Conversations faltered, cut short by the suddenness of my movement. Forks clattered onto plates, glasses tipped slightly in surprise, and a hush fell over the table. All eyes turned to me, wide with curiosity, disbelief, or perhaps judgment. I didn't care. Not anymore. Each mocking word from him had been a nail in the coffin of my patience, and the final jab at the dinner table was the one I refused to endure. For the first time in years, I chose myself over appearances, over etiquette, over the carefully curated image of our marriage. Standing, I swept past my stunned husband, feeling the weight of every smirk and whispered comment lighten with each step toward the exit. The city night greeted me with a brisk breeze that carried both freedom and uncertainty. Streetlights cast long, wavering shadows on the sidewalks, and the distant hum of traffic became a rhythmic accompaniment to my racing thoughts. I felt the thrill of autonomy, raw and intoxicating, mingled with the ache of abandonment that had always been there, but ignored. With every block I walked, I remembered the dreams I had set aside, the ambitions quietly shelved to avoid his disdain. The courses I'd wanted to take, the businesses I'd imagined starting, the creative projects dismissed with a laugh. They all surged back, emboldening me with the reminder that none of them were gone forever. Each step became a declaration. I would no longer shrink, no longer allow my worth to be dictated by someone else's amusement. The night stretched endlessly, a canvas of possibility, and I imagined the life I could rebuild, one deliberate choice at a time. Anger and sorrow intertwined, fueling a new energy that was not destructive, but empowering. The weight of past humiliation transformed into a focused determination, a promise that the world, and he, would witness my true potential. As I walked past familiar streets and quiet parks, a vision of the future crystallized in my mind, a version of myself untethered from ridicule, commanding respect, achieving everything I had been denied. I whispered to the night air almost defiantly. I would rebuild, but they'd never see it coming. The days after walking away were heavier than I imagined. The city that had felt so alive that first night now seemed indifferent. Its bustling streets a reminder that the world didn't pause for my heartbreak or humiliation. I returned to a small apartment I had rented months ago, one I had considered temporary. But now it felt like the starkest reminder of how far I had fallen from the life of luxury and status I'd once taken for granted. The furniture was sparse, the walls bare, and the quiet hum of the radiator was the only sound keeping me company. Bills piled on the kitchen counter, each one a jolt of reality. Rent, utilities, groceries. The fortune I had once shared, the wealth I had taken for granted, was now irrelevant. I had nothing but the skills, knowledge, and tenacity that my husband had mocked. The first week was a blur of budgeting, errands, and sleepless nights. I questioned every choice I'd ever made, every dream I had abandoned in deference to his ego. I was plagued by doubt. Could I really build something from this? Or was I destined to be crushed under the weight of my own ambition? Yet beneath the fear simmered a stubborn ember of resolve. I began to sketch out ideas late at night, pen in hand, maps and spreadsheets and lists sprawling across the tiny kitchen table. The luxury I had left behind was a constant contrast, a reminder of what I had once been capable of achieving and what I intended to surpass. It was during one of these long nights that I found guidance in unexpected places. A mentor I met through a workshop offered practical advice and sharp insights, teaching me not only how to manage resources, but how to recognize opportunities where others saw risk. Conversations with seasoned entrepreneurs, a mix of encouragement and hard truths, reminded me that success wasn't instantaneous, but built from careful strategy, persistence, and occasionally daring boldness. Slowly, I began assembling a plan, small but solid, each step a deliberate move toward reclaiming autonomy and building the life I deserved. Even amidst uncertainty, there were glimmers of hope. My first small win came in the form of a freelance contract I almost hesitated to accept, the kind of work that reminded me I still had value and competence. I delivered more than expected, exceeding expectations and earning genuine praise. For the first time in weeks, a sense of pride, faint but unmistakable, warmed the cold edges of doubt. Each modest achievement was a brick in the foundation of something larger, a quiet signal that the empire I envisioned might actually take shape. I stared at the skyline from my window that night, contrasting the glittering towers of wealth I had left behind with my modest apartment below, and whispered a silent vow. This is just the beginning. The nights became my sanctuary, a place where I could rewrite the narrative that had confined me for so long. I immersed myself in books, online courses, and lectures, consuming knowledge with a hunger that surprised even me. Each page, each new skill, was a small rebellion against the years of belittlement I had endured. I remembered his smirks, the quiet dismissals, the way he had laughed when I suggested pursuing something ambitious on my own. Those memories, once sharp pangs of pain, transformed into fuel, propelling me to prove not to him, but to myself that I was capable, intelligent, and deserving of respect. I took risks I never would have dared before. I reached out to mentors, sent cold emails to industry leaders, and pitched ideas that had once felt too audacious. Rejection came quickly, and often harshly, echoing the criticisms I had absorbed from him over the years. There were nights I wept quietly in my small apartment, overwhelmed by self-doubt and frustration, wondering if I had overestimated my abilities. But each failure carried lessons. Each no strengthened my resolve. I realized that my husband had never seen my potential, and perhaps never would, but that didn't matter anymore. I was building something for me, something no one could diminish. The first signs of recognition arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. A mentor praised my persistence, a colleague complimented the originality of my work, and a small project I had completed began to gain attention online. That micro-status reversal, being acknowledged, respected, even admired by strangers and peers, was intoxicating. For the first time, I felt the validation I had long craved, not through his approval, but through the merit of my own effort. I caught glimpses of myself in mirrors, no longer the timid, deferential woman he had underestimated, but someone growing into strength, poise, and purpose. Amidst the late nights of learning and early mornings of planning, I reflected on every insult, every sneer, every moment of dismissal. They no longer wounded me. They reminded me of how far I had come, and how far I was willing to go. I could feel the tide shifting beneath me, a slow, steady ascent from the shadows of neglect to a place of influence and authority. Hope began to rise alongside frustration, a twin flame that pushed me forward, whispering that I was capable of more than I had ever dared to dream. And with each new skill mastered, each small victory won, I felt the beginnings of an empire forming, a testament to the woman he had foolishly ignored. The day my first major success landed, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me in the reflection of my office window. Months of relentless work, countless rejections, and sleepless nights had culminated in a deal I had once thought impossible. A business contract that would set the foundation for something far larger than I had dared imagine. When the congratulatory emails started arriving, I felt a thrill that was equal parts validation and defiance. Every well done from colleagues, every nod of acknowledgement, reminded me of the countless times I had been dismissed, ignored, or belittled. They had laughed at me, mocked my ambitions, and treated my ideas like trivialities. But now, the first taste of recognition was mine, and it was sweet. Word spread quickly within my small professional circle. Friends who had once assumed I was aimless began asking for advice. Colleagues sought collaboration, and even casual acquaintances who had known me only as someone in the shadows started noticing the quiet force I had become. The subtle internal satisfaction grew with every acknowledgement, a quiet fire that bolstered my confidence and sharpened my resolve. I no longer needed applause from the past. I could feel it internally, a steady rhythm affirming that my talents, persistence, and vision had weight, substance, and impact. Yet with recognition came its own complexities. Envy emerged like a shadow lurking behind smiles and polite words. Subtle attempts at sabotage, miscommunications, delays, and questioning of my decisions tested not only my skills, but my patience. I encountered colleagues who wanted to see me stumble, gossip that sought to diminish my achievements, and whispers that tried to undermine the legitimacy of my work. Each challenge forced me to grow, to refine my strategy, and to remain vigilant without becoming cynical. The tension added a sharp edge to the thrill of success, making each victory feel hard-won and all the more satisfying. Even as I navigated these new dynamics, the contrast with my former life was impossible to ignore. I recalled the extravagant dinners where my husband had mocked my efforts, the social circles where my ideas had been dismissed as trivial. Now I commanded respect, admiration, and attention on my own terms, and the memory of past humiliation fueled a steady, simmering satisfaction. They laughed at me, I thought quietly during a meeting, the corners of my mouth curving into a private, knowing smile. But they'll see. With every successful negotiation, every acknowledgement from peers, I felt the momentum shift beneath me. The woman who had once been overshadowed was emerging as someone unstoppable, and the foundation for an empire I had only dared to imagine was beginning to take solid form. Even as my career began to flourish, shadows of doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps I had lost my way. The small triumphs that once felt electrifying now carried the weight of expectation, both my own and that of the world watching silently. Late nights alone in my apartment became more than work. They became a crucible of reflection, where I questioned every choice I had made. Do I forgive him? Do I seek revenge? Could I be stronger if I let go of anger entirely? Or is the fire of justice what fuels me forward? The questions twisted in my mind, gnawing at my confidence, and I found myself reliving the mockery, the belittling, the subtle slights that had once seemed tolerable, but now burned with fresh intensity. Loneliness weighed heavily, too. Friends and colleagues celebrated my achievements, yet at night, I felt the absence of someone who had known me before, someone who could have witnessed my journey firsthand. The city outside my window continued, its relentless pace, a reminder that life moved on for everyone else, while I wrestled with insecurities that had little to do with tangible obstacles and everything to do with the lingering ghosts of past judgment. Societal whispers, the occasional sideways glance, even the unspoken assumptions of those who didn't know my story, reminded me that no matter how far I climbed, scrutiny followed. The contrast between my rising public image and the inner turbulence made the victories bittersweet. And yet, temptation came disguised as comfort. There were nights I considered reaching out, softening edges, pretending the past had less impact, as if reconciliation could erase years of condescension. The pull of old habits, submissiveness, avoidance of conflict, the desire to please, was strong, a reminder of how I had once measured my worth against someone else's approval. But each time I wavered, the memory of that mocking dinner, the humiliation in front of friends, the sharp sting of disregard, flared inside me, reigniting the determination that had carried me this far. Through this tension, I discovered something crucial. Doubt could be a guide, not a chain. It forced me to examine my motivations, to question whether my drive came from anger, ambition, or both, and to confront the uncomfortable truth that progress was rarely linear. I could feel the power of my choices shaping me, testing my resolve, and pushing me toward clarity. The path forward was uncertain, yet necessary. Every setback, every moment of temptation, sharpened my focus, reminding me that to truly reclaim my life, I had to confront not just the world, but the lingering fears and longings within myself. By the time I truly understood the weight of my potential, there was no turning back. I made a quiet, irrevocable decision. This was no longer about proving anything to the world. It was about proving to myself that I could rise higher than I had ever imagined, and perhaps, in a subtle, indirect way, show him the cost of underestimating me. Every choice I made from that point forward was deliberate. I sought out high-profile collaborations, projects that demanded skill and audacity, opportunities that tested both my intellect and my patience. I learned to navigate social circles, with precision, cultivating connections that reinforced my credibility and visibility. Each handshake, each carefully chosen word became a building block in the empire I was constructing, one invisible to the untrained eye but undeniable in its impact. As my presence grew, whispers of recognition began to surface. Colleagues praised. My leadership competitors grudgingly acknowledged my strategic prowess, and invitations to prestigious events arrived with increasing frequency. The contrast between my past and present was impossible to ignore. Where I had once been dismissed, overlooked, and laughed at, now I commanded attention and respect. Every glance I received in professional settings, every nod of approval, reminded me of the woman I had once been. Timid, underestimated, silenced. The shift was intoxicating, but I kept my satisfaction private, a quiet fire burning beneath a composed exterior. Even more striking was the subtle shift in him. I noticed his curiosity in passing comments, the faint unease in his voice when our mutual acquaintances mentioned my accomplishments, and the glimpses of astonishment that betrayed a recognition of my rise. This was the second power reversal, delicate yet undeniable. He had once dictated my worth, shaped my sense of self with dismissive laughter, and now, quietly, he was measuring me in ways that had nothing to do with his amusement. The thought brought a small, vindicated smile. I wasn't seeking confrontation. My success itself was a statement, one that would echo louder than any argument or rebuttal ever could. The plan, now fully solidified, extended beyond mere personal achievement. I was building social proof, a visible demonstration of capability and influence. Public achievements became milestones, carefully selected to reinforce perception and command attention. Each deal closed, each collaboration completed, was another subtle message. The woman you mocked is now a force impossible to ignore. As I moved through this stage of my journey, the contrast framed itself naturally. The ignored, underestimated me had transformed into someone whose presence demanded acknowledgement, whose intellect and determination carved paths where ridicule had once reigned. With every step, I felt the foundation of my empire strengthen, unshakable and unrelenting. The invitation arrived unexpectedly, an elegant envelope embossed with gold lettering, announcing a gala honoring innovators and rising leaders in my field. I stared at it for a long moment, the weight of recognition sinking in. Months of relentless effort, sleepless nights, and quiet perseverance had led to this moment. The event was more than just an opportunity to celebrate accomplishments. It was a stage, a public acknowledgement that the world had begun to see me in a way that mattered. I felt a surge of both pride and nervous anticipation. For years, I had existed in the background, unnoticed and underestimated, and now, the spotlight was finally mine. As I arrived, the room buzzed with conversation, the hum of admiration palpable. Colleagues approached with genuine warmth, praising my work, asking questions about projects I had nurtured from scratch, and sharing their excitement over future collaborations. I felt a mixture of exhilaration and disbelief, each handshake and smile confirming that I was no longer invisible. The contrast between this moment and the countless evenings spent watching my husband dominate social settings with ease, dismissing me quietly beside him, was almost dizzying. Here, I was the one commanding attention, the one whose presence drew respect, curiosity, and admiration. I couldn't help but think of him. I had learned through mutual acquaintances that word of my achievements had traveled back to him, reaching his ears through social media updates and casual mentions. Would he recognize me now? Would he understand the scope of what I had built, or would he dismiss it as luck, coincidence, or exaggeration? The thought sent a thrill through me, a quiet satisfaction tempered by patience. I didn't need his validation, never again. But imagining the faint stir of surprise or discomfort in his mind added a subtle, intoxicating layer to my sense of triumph. Even as the gala progressed, subtle tensions bubbled beneath the polished surface. Colleagues, rivals, and admirers all observed one another, navigating envy, curiosity, and unspoken comparisons. I could feel the dynamics shift, the balance of attention subtly realigning. I moved through the crowd with confidence, aware of the power of perception, letting my achievement speak before I ever did. The event was a microcosm of the larger journey I had undertaken. Months of quiet determination culminating in a moment where recognition, admiration, and respect converged. And as the night drew on, the anticipation of future payoffs, the promise of ultimate vindication lingered in the air, sweet, delayed, and entirely worth savoring. The day of the presentation, I felt a thrill of anticipation, mingled with a quiet, simmering satisfaction. Months of preparation had led to this moment, a high-profile business pitch to investors, the kind of audience that could make or break a rising empire. The room was pristine, filled with polished tables, eager faces, and a subtle hum of expectation. And there, just beyond the entrance, I caught sight of him, my husband, invited by mutual contacts under the guise of curiosity, completely unaware that he would witness the full scale of my success firsthand. His eyes widened as he scanned the room, and I knew immediately that recognition was dawning. This was my chance, not for petty revenge, but for the satisfaction of him seeing the woman he had dismissed and mocked rise far beyond his comprehension. As I began my presentation, my confidence radiated with every word. I outlined strategies, showcased results, and spoke with the authority of someone who had earned every accolade. The audience leaned forward, absorbed, applauding where appropriate, asking questions that challenged my expertise, and I answered each one with precision and poise. Every glance I stole in his direction revealed subtle shifts: disbelief, a flicker of jealousy, the realization that he had underestimated me. He remembered the crystal chandelier dinner, the smirk on his face, the mocking words that had cut me so deeply. Now, the tables had turned. At one point, during the discussion of a successful merger, I illustrated a deal I had secured that dwarfed any venture he had ever managed. I watched his jaw tighten as whispers circulated around him. Colleagues congratulating me, strangers praising my vision, acquaintances marveling at the results I had produced almost single-handedly. A faint flush crept into his cheeks, and I felt a surge of quiet triumph. I did not need to gloat. The evidence of my achievement spoke louder than any words I could muster. Still, a flash of boldness surged through me, and I added a remark that resonated without arrogance. Persistence, strategy, and respect for one's team go a long way. He stiffened, realizing the underlying message. He had once dismissed these qualities in me, and now he was confronted with the tangible proof of their power. The meeting concluded with applause, handshakes and smiles, and I felt the psychological satisfaction settle deep in my chest. Karma had not needed my intervention. It unfolded naturally, a reflection of the effort, vision, and determination that I had poured into every step of this journey. My husband lingered as the crowd dissipated, unable to hide his astonishment. He opened his mouth, perhaps to comment, perhaps to justify, but no words were necessary. I had said everything without uttering a single personal jab. My success, my empire, my recognition, and the undeniable proof that he had been wrong were enough. As we left the room, his eyes still lingered on me, searching for an explanation, a flaw, a reason why I had achieved what he could not have imagined. I met his gaze briefly, calm and unyielding, letting the weight of my accomplishments speak louder than any confrontation. The echo of the laughter from that dinner years ago had transformed, replaced now by the sound of acknowledgement, admiration, and the subtle sting of vindication. In that moment, I understood the depth of the power shift. I had reclaimed not only my career and confidence, but also the respect and validation that had once been denied. He had witnessed it, publicly and unmistakably, and I carried the satisfaction of that karma silently within me. After the gala, after the applause and the subtle yet undeniable recognition in his eyes, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The adrenaline that had driven me through endless preparation, sleepless nights, and calculated risks slowly ebbed, leaving behind a quiet, steady sense of empowerment. I walked alone through the city streets that had once felt so vast and indifferent, but now seemed to welcome me with a calm that mirrored my internal state. I thought about every choice I had made, every small victory that had led me here, and realized that this journey was about more than proving anyone wrong. It was about reclaiming myself. The lessons were etched deeply into me. I understood now that growth does not require vengeance, that success is sweeter when it is built from deliberate effort, not reactionary spite. Yet the satisfaction of seeing the one who had dismissed me confronted with the reality of my rise was undeniably sweet. A reminder that justice can be subtle, patient, and entirely effective when life itself aligns with one's worth. I reflected on the contrast between the timid, overlooked woman I had once been and the confident, capable person I had become. Each step had been painstaking, but each step had been mine, chosen and owned fully. Closure settled over me like a soft blanket. I no longer needed external validation to measure my value. The empire I had built, the recognition I had earned, and the knowledge of my own perseverance were proof enough. There was still complexity, of course, the memories of humiliation, the ache of years spent undervalued, but they no longer held power over me. Instead, they served as markers of how far I had come, reminders that my strength had been forged in the fires of adversity. I paused to consider the subtle irony. The man who had once dismissed me now existed on the periphery of my life, no longer defining my path. The empowerment I felt was not fueled by malice, but by self-realization, a profound understanding that reclaiming control over one's destiny is the ultimate triumph. I smiled softly, acknowledging the bittersweet nature of this victory. Life had delivered both justice and clarity, showing me that strength, patience, and unwavering belief in oneself are the most potent tools of all. In that quiet, reflective moment, I understood that I was free, not just from his shadow, but from the limitations I had once imposed upon myself, and for the first time in years I felt fully, irrevocably whole. Years later, I can see the ripple effect of the choices I made and the empire I built. Friends reach out for guidance, sharing their own struggles and seeking insight into how I turned rejection into opportunity. Acquaintances, once skeptical or dismissive, now approach with respect, some quietly inspired to pursue ambitions they had buried. Even strangers, reading about my journey or witnessing it unfold in professional circles, find hope in the story of someone who refused to be diminished. The weight of my past humiliation has transformed into a beacon, a testament that perseverance and self-belief can rewrite any narrative. The contrast between who I was and who I became is striking. I remember the dinners, the laughter at my expense, the subtle condescension that once filled every interaction. And yet now, I am celebrated, acknowledged, and admired. Not because I sought vengeance, but because I refused to let their perception define my worth. Status, once a tool of their power over me, has become a reflection of my effort, discipline, and vision. Every handshake, every nod of approval, every quiet word of gratitude from those I've mentored or inspired reinforces that I am capable of commanding influence without compromising my integrity. There were moments of doubt along the way, of course, when fear or loneliness threatened to derail my path. But each decision to persevere, each risk taken, each small victory earned, built a legacy that transcends temporary triumphs. I have seen the subtle shift in family dynamics, the quiet astonishment of those who once dismissed me, and the respect I now command in social and professional spheres. Empathy and redemption intertwine in the narrative of my life, reminding me that empowerment can coexist with kindness, and that achievement need not be cruel to be satisfying. Reflecting on it all, I realized the most profound lesson. Their approval was never necessary. The envy, the surprise, the whispered admiration, they are fleeting echoes compared to the lasting satisfaction of knowing I created my own destiny. I smile at the memory of their disbelief, the disbelief that once fueled my quiet fury, and I feel only calm and certainty. They envied me then, but I never needed their approval to succeed. I had built my life on my terms, with my own hands and vision, and the impact of that choice continues to shape not just my story, but the paths of those who witness it. Looking back, the journey feels almost surreal. From the dinners where my ambitions were mocked, to the sleepless nights of doubt and hard work, every moment shaped the woman I became. The The humiliation I endured was never wasted. It became fuel, a catalyst that pushed me to reclaim my voice, my confidence, and my place in the world. I learned that empowerment is not given. It is earned through resilience, focus, and the courage to refuse anyone else's definition of your worth. Each step, each risk, each small victory built upon the last, forming an empire that no laughter or sneer could ever diminish. The story isn't just about revenge. It's about transformation. It's about taking the pain, the dismissal, the subtle and overt betrayals, and using them to illuminate your own potential. The satisfaction isn't in seeing someone humbled, though that moment of recognition is sweet. It's in realizing your power, your independence, and the clarity that comes when you step into your full worth. Validation comes not from those who once overlooked you, but from within, as you witness your own growth and the fruits of your persistence. To anyone watching, the takeaway is clear. Your dreams and abilities are never diminished by others' opinions or mockery. Obstacles, setbacks, and even betrayal are part of the narrative that can lead to empowerment and fulfillment, if you choose to harness them. There is hope in every struggle, strength in every disappointment, and possibility in every risk taken. And while the story of this dinner, the mocking words, and the empire I built has reached its resolution, life is never without its next chapter. The choices we make now, the resilience we cultivate, and the courage we summon will continue to shape not only our path, but the legacy we leave behind. So, as you reflect on this journey with me, remember, even in moments of dismissal, doubt, or humiliation, there is a power within you waiting to rise. Every challenge can become an opportunity, every setback a lesson, and every quiet resolve a step toward triumph. And who knows, maybe the next story isn't finished yet, and the next victory is already waiting just around the corner.